Vino Geek Podcast, wine from a Kiwi perspective. We're back with another episode, and this week, as you saw with the title, it's all about Martinborough. We're looking at everything that makes Martinborough produce a world-class Pinot, and not only Pinot, but wine in general. The climate, the soil, we're taking into account even the history and highlighting some of the better producers, just so you can get a full picture and understand why you should be drinking Martinborough wine. And, you know, we all know about Central Otago and the fanfare that it has, but we forget about Martinborough. Martinborough's right there producing some amazing wine, and we need to get around it and enjoy these wines because its nickname is the Burgundy of the South. If any region gets that title, they must produce amazing world-class Pinot. You can't be named after the home of Pinot Noir and not produce good Pinot. So yeah, and it's just annoys me that it isn't as popular. Sure, they don't have the sheer volume of wine, but you still got to get around it because it produces both powerful and nuanced wines, and it's drinkable earlier than Central even, and ages particularly well. The one thing with Central is that we drink it far too young, but really we should start drinking it a lot later than we do. So yeah, after the break, we're going to break down each and every part of this.
Just taking a quick pause in the episode to remind you to like, subscribe, comment, and come and follow me on socials too.
Starting off with the climate. Now, the thing to note is that Martinborough is the driest region in the North Island to grow grapes. It's a sun-drenched valley that's cooled by by southerly winds. I talked about this in that first little short I did last week from the south. That creates slow ripening and a long growing season. The rainfall is just under a metre, so it gets some good amount of rain, but and the temperature, summer temperatures get up to the early 30s, but flanking the summer, it is quite cool. The spring and the autumn is quite cool. As I mentioned in last week's short, the wind comes through in spring and just destroys flowering. So that's why they get low yields. And then autumn is cool as well, which sets the lovely flavour and intensity. Okay, now to the soil and the geography of the place. It is set the town between the township basically and the Huangarua River on this alluvial river terrace full of old river gravels, and yeah, because of that, you get lovely, fertile, perfect for growing grapes, but it's quite a small area and they say it's broken into two sort of main smaller areas, the actual original terrace itself, and then Tamuna Road. However, if you talk to Mr. Pinot, Larry McKenna, he says there's no real difference between both sides. But hey, he's saying that if you love Martinborough Pinot and you see a difference, go for it. But yeah, as I said, alluvial gravel riverbeds. Now to the history. So Martinborough used to be, and still is to an extent, the Wairarapa is sheep farming country. So it was a sheep farming area, and then in the late 70s, early 80s, led by Dry River, Atarangi, Martinborough Vineyards, and Shifney, which is now where you find Margrain, they tried growing grapes, and obviously to great success. The only issue is that, as I touched on, with the southerly winds in spring knocking off all the flowers, it's extremely low yielding, so you get a tiny production. But hey, that makes for powerful and nuanced and intense wines because of the lack of fruit, so that the vines can just pump all its energy into that small amount. For me, there is some, obviously those producers that I mentioned are key producers in the area, But then there's ones that came later, likes of Palliser, an escarpment that was set up by Larry McKenna that I mentioned earlier. And then obviously Craigie Range, which has the biggest holding in Martinborough, and how they've helped to mould and shape and evolve it. There's also newer producers like Moy Hall and Cambridge Road that I am actually a fan of. To be honest, I'm a fan of Martinborough in general. There's this Schubert, and there's a lot of small little producers in Martinborough, and it's hard to pinpoint a few because they all make really good wines, as I said, because of this fact that they are such tiny yields and such a low producing area that you get quality all the time. And this is the thing, it's a little bit hit and miss with other regions, especially around Pinot Noir, but Pinot Noir loves to be produced at low yields. Low yields produce the best Pinot, so it's undoubtedly why Martinborough produces world-class Pinot. So, those are a handful of producers that I really, really enjoy and like to get behind and support, because obviously, Dry River and Martinborough Vineyards, Ātarangi, they sort of lead the way, and Escarpment is that higher end, and then you've got these other guys that come in underneath it, what have you. So, the big brands plus the smaller guys. Okay, so it's not just Pinot Noir that Martinborough does and does well. I mean, Sauvignon Blanc I personally prefer Martinborough Sauvignon Blanc to Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. Now, this is the general overview because obviously there's some amazing Marlborough producers for Sauvignon Blanc at that higher end. It is just, they're spectacular. But when you're looking at that mid-range, for me, pound for pound, Martinborough sort of is right there. And it's a different style, it's not that intense, punchy. It's a little bit pared back. It's slightly softer, a little bit riper there, a little bit warmer, not too much. But also because of the low yields, there's a lot more flavour and dry. So they get a little riper, they get a little lower acidity, so you get that richer round of character. And I enjoy that in my Sauvignon Blanc. I don't really enjoy the high acid and the high fruit. I like the acid to be a little pared back, and so I can enjoy the wine a bit more. And as far as a standout for this is Palliser. Palliser sort of in Craigie Range is the most popular, but for me, Palliser, just, you smell it and you know it's Palliser Sauvignon Blanc if you know Palliser Sauvignon Blanc. Chardonnay is also a big thing in Martinborough. They make exceptional Chardonnay, and it's because Chardonnay and Pinot Noir go hand in hand. They're both from Burgundy, places that produce great Pinot Noir should produce great Chardonnay, and so they do too. Escarpment I just had recently was superb, so that's one to check out. Other wines, they do other reds as well, and for me, the standout that I've had as far as a non-Pinot Noir goes is the Ātarangi Celebré. It's Syrah dominant now with its Merlot and Cabernet in there, and it's just, it ticks all the boxes. It has that lovely spice and that lovely dark fruit of the Syrah and the pepper paired with the rich around the Merlot and the structure of the Cabernet, and then a bit of floral from the Cabernet Franc. So it has all of those nuances in a complete package. Really delicious wine. It really sets the benchmark and says this can be done in Martinborough. So yeah, those are a few wines to get around as far as non-Pinot Noir is concerned. Okay, now to wrap it all up and put a little bow on it, we need to celebrate Martinborough more. We need to get around Martinborough as far as high-end premium producer of wine in New Zealand. We, for one of a better, for better or for worse, have been brainwashed into thinking Central Otago is the only place you want to get Pinot Noir from, when all the while Martinborough has been producing just world-class Pinot year in, year out. It needs to be championed. It needs to be celebrated because, you know, why make all this great wine and no one's drinking it? You know, and I've banged the drum for Martinborough for a long time. Those that are regulars to the merchant that buy Pinot Noir over the past decade would have known this because I continually would pump up the Martinborough Pinot Noir because, for me, the big thing is that it shows earlier, shows complexity and power and nuance earlier than Central, generally speaking. Obviously, there's exceptions. And then it still has that ability to age like Central. As I said earlier, Central, for me, the better Central Pinots need about 8 years before they really express what they are and who they are, where Martinborough knows us earlier. The Martinborough wines tend to sort of only need about 4 years for the most part, and they show all their cards, but they continue to show those cards for a long time, which to me is great because we don't always have the opportunity to wait that long. And the other great thing is that even though they're tiny yields, because Martinborough isn't so popular, you can normally get the Pinots already in that window. You don't have to wait like Central, where it's almost like a year after harvest they're releasing them, especially the top producers like Felton Road and what have you. They need it. Their current release is coming out a year after they were picked. So that's the thing. Martinborough, because of its lack of popularity, actually helps it so that when you do drink it, it's at its peak. I mean, one thing, the wines are very different, and we'll just touch on that. Right. So for me, one thing I should have discussed earlier is this, and it's the style of Pinot. We're talking about Pinot primarily, and one thing is that it has this power and intensity and nuance. But the key flavors for me are, you get this earthy sort of forestal tone coming through with fruits like cranberry. There's a little bit of plum. You still get the cherries, you get the strawberries, like Central, but you get that cranberry and what have you, as well as that forestal character, that sort of earthy, mushroomy tone to it, where Central, you tend to get more of the herb, that wild herb, a little bit of that sort of flinty gun smoke with those black cherries and strawberry and, those plumper, juicier sort of berry fruits, where in Martinborough, they don't tend to be as plump and juicy. They tend to be there and rich and full, but not as intense. While they get the warm days and cool nights, they don't get that serious intensity that Martinborough Central does. So you get a little bit of a flattening of that peak and trough of flavour. So while both are very good, they're very different, and so some people do prefer the other way. But just try them, experience them, and see if you might actually enjoy that sort of earthy, mushroomy, sort of funky sort of tone, and just embrace it and really get around it. So yeah, those are the key differences between the two.
Just taking a quick pause in the episode to remind you to like, subscribe, comment, and come and follow me on socials too.
Okay, to finish things off, the wine of the week. Now, this is one that I tried a little ways back. I actually had a visit from Sandy, the marketing manager from Palliser Estate, come and see me. And the wine showed up really, really well. And in particular, the Pinot Noir, which over the years, I will be honest, has been a little bit underwhelming. From my personal opinion, it lacked a little bit of depth. Not this year. So ironically, the 2023, which was Cyclone Gabrielle, that should have produced fruit that had less intensity and less weight and power, produced something I think had more weight and power. So the colour, garnet with the core of sort of ruby, so quite intense, which I was surprised with. The nose had strawberries and cherries and sort of mulled spice, that sweet sort of brown spice, a little bit of licorice, and just a lot of sort of those warming sweet spice tones with that fruit, which made me think, oh, this has got a bit more to it. The palate was elegant and refined with smooth cocoa and super fine tannins. So it doesn't sound like it was super big. And it wasn't. But, everything had its place. Everything had its balance. It was just perfectly plump and ripe for what it should be. Given that, for me, the history of Palliser Pinot is that it's always been a little bit light and a little bit thin, but this one had that body, that weight, and carry through and length through the palate. It actually, for me, was more impressive than the Huanui, their reserve. The Huanui had, ironically, had a beautiful nose, but the palate was it was a little bit short, so it obviously needed more time to age and develop very young, where this, you see, made to show a little bit earlier, so really good. I had a quick look to check out the tasting notes as well on this and just see how far away I was. I was a little bit away from where they talked about. They talked about summer hay, which I didn't notice that. And they also talk about matching with Peking duck, which would be very interesting. That probably would go very well in that duck with that sweet, intense, sticky sauce would probably be very good with it. Aging, this has got a lot of years left in it, so you've got plenty of time to drink this. So yeah, that's our wrap on Martinborough, just in a deep dive into the different aspects of what makes Martinborough Pinot so world class. And yeah, I hope you picked up more on it and you enjoyed that. And just continue to follow and subscribe and check out more of my content, because you will learn more, you will grow with it, and you will, hopefully learn to love more of the left of centre things that New Zealand has to offer. So thank you as always for joining us. Until next time, Sante Borakia.